Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, hosted by the National Association of State Boards of Education, State Strategies for Successful Student Transitions to High School and Beyond. You are in for a treat. I know you have choices about where you can be, but you have chosen wisely today because we have an amazing panel about an amazing topic, one that doesn't get as much attention as we'd like it to, and that's why I'm excited that we're having this one today. My name is Paulo Di Maria. I'm the president and CEO of the National Association of State Boards of Education. We go by the name NASB. Today's webinar is State Strategies for Successful Student Transitions to High School and Beyond. I would encourage you all as participants to change your name to make sure you add your organization and your state affiliation as appropriate. And I would also challenge you, since the topic today is transitions into high school, put your name in the chat and write one or two words or a phrase about your ninth grade year, if you can remember. For me, that's a long time ago. For many of you, I hope that's not too far in the past, but a couple of words about your feelings and reactions about the idea of your ninth grade year. The National Association of State Boards of Education, as the name implies, is a nonpartisan, nonprofit membership organization that's focused solely on supporting the citizen leaders on state boards of education in doing the great work that they do to strengthen public education systems so that students of all backgrounds and circumstances are prepared to succeed in school and in work and in life. They are generally part of the policymaking and practice promoting education infrastructure in the various states in which they serve. Today's webinar, a couple of norms I'd like to review with you. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available for viewing and distributed as well. We've enabled closed captioning for those who require that functionality. We're using a webinar format, so please put your questions and answers into the Q&A function. The Q&A function, you'll see that generally if you're using a desktop at the bottom of your screen, you'll have to access it differently if you're using a mobile phone. That's where we'd like to hear your questions. And those will be answered either in writing or we'll try to factor it into the conversation. And finally, look to the chat for different resources. Our staff and the team from the different organizations will be posting resource links throughout the entirety of today's webinar. I want to acknowledge the generosity of our key funder, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. They're exceptional in that they are supporting our high school transformation network here at NASB and doing exceptional work in that area. I also want to highlight our high school transformation state network. This is a network that we started, and I'll talk about a publication that we did in a minute, but it was derivative from that publication about high schools, and that generated a lot of interest among our members. So we did a call out for state teams that would focus on doing transformative work. And you'll see the 6 teams mentioned on the slide: California, Washington, Missouri, Kentucky, Indiana, and New York. We had a great in-person meeting in Indianapolis just recently. If you want to know more about our network, you can scan the QR code here on the slide. And our project lead is Selena Perotet, whose email address is there. I'm sure it'll eventually also make its way into the chat, and you can reach out to her to learn more. We have a national advisory council of many players who are doing work in the space of high school transformation, which informs our work. And we find that to be a really great thing, because one of the things NASB does best, we're a small organization, but we love to partner with other people and are always on the lookout for that. Finally, I want to remind people that our annual conference is coming up in, I'm sorry, let me redo what I just said recently. We have a new issue of the State Education Standard on which this webinar is based, called Transitions. And it has a number of articles in it that talk about transitions from preschool to kindergarten, from elementary to middle, middle to high, high to college, and so on and so forth. This webinar is really built off of the article that's in the middle of these 3 bullets, promoting students' well-being during the transition to high school. If you want to see this issue of the standard, you can scan the QR code and it will take you there. Now I'll talk about our annual conference, which will be held in Austin, Texas. October 27th is our pre-conference date. The conference dates are October 28th and 29th. We are currently in an active call for proposals. You can use this QR code to take you there. You'll find the link. Our deadline is coming up soon, so I would encourage you to act quickly and move things forward. As many of you who have attended our conference knows, it's an amazing opportunity to hear a lot of things, interact with state board members, and what have you. Great. Before I introduce our panel, let me just tell you why I'm so excited about this particular conversation. And not the least of which is that it amplifies some things that this issue of the standard that we just put out on transitions. It also speaks closely to the work of our high school transformation network, as well as an issue of the standard that we put out about high school reform, because we saw it as an interest of our state board members and an interest of many people, and both in policymaking and in practitioners across the country. This sense that maybe our traditional high school models just aren't meeting the needs of every student. And are there some things? And some people are already doing innovations. And when you walk into an innovative high school, it starts clicking with you why it's innovative, why those students might be more engaged, more successful, happier, and better prepared for life and for careers and for their futures. And so in the spirit of NASB, we are always on the lookout for partners. And so what we put together here is a collection of partners. And we're specifically going to focus on this transition into high school from middle school, kind of focusing around the 9th grade year. And you'll hear some of the reasons why 9th grade is so important. People come into 9th grade, it's where you begin to set the tone of your high school experience. And if that 9th grade year doesn't go very well, you might be, quote unquote, retained in 9th grade and not advanced to the 10th grade, which happens quite frequently. And then you might, you'll impact the rest of your high school experience by those difficult times you have in high school. So we all have a valid interest in trying to make sure we take whatever steps, both from a policy perspective and a practice perspective, to make sure kids start strong and that they understand what they're getting into, and that we support them in being successful, both from an academic perspective and just from a belongingness perspective. So as I said, and whenever we do a webinar, it's all about, what can state board members as policymakers, what can other policymakers, what can advocates do to help advance this? And this is an area where we really can make a difference. You are lucky today because you have an amazing panel of researchers, practitioners, policymakers joining together to talk about this very important subject. To start, we have our main presenter, who was the key author of the article, Briana Lopez. She's a doctoral candidate at the University of Texas at Austin in their Department of Human Development and Family Sciences. She's going to lead us off with summarizing the contents of her article and really laying the groundwork for this idea of the realities around the transitions into high school. April Benner is a professor at the Department of Human Development and Family Sciences at the University of Texas at Austin. She's going to be here to comment and provide additional context on the topic. Rob Metz is the Deputy Director of the BARR Center. That's BARR, and that's an acronym for Building Assets, Reducing Risks. It's an amazing program that focuses on exactly this kind of issue that we're talking about. How do we support students in being successful in their scholastic pursuits? He is an educator that's served 35 years in public schools in Minnesota, both as an educator, a high school principal, so he really knows from boots on the ground experience, as well as a superintendent, and frankly in the first place where a BARR Center school was established. Daniel Chuhta is the Deputy Commissioner of the Maine Department of Education that has been doing a lot of work to build out the BARR Center program in the schools of Maine. He's formerly an 8th grade science teacher, so he too understands these realities about transitioning to high school, and we welcome him to our panel. And then Linda Darling-Hammond, who is well known and has an amazing record of accomplishment. She is on the State Board of Education in California, and in fact serves as its president. She's been on the board for 6 years. She's a highly regarded researcher, practitioner, policymaker. She's earned the AERA Distinguished Lifetime Service Award, and she continues to currently serve at the organization, the Learning Policy Institute, as their Chief Knowledge Officer, having recently concluded her service as the CEO. So you are in for a real treat. And so rather than hearing me talk anymore, I'm going to turn it over to Briana to get us started. Briana, take it away.
Thanks so much, Paolo. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Well, just recapping that introduction, my name is Briana Lopez, and I am a doctoral candidate at the University of Texas at Austin, where I work with Dr. April Benner, who I'm fortunate enough to be participating in this webinar with. And we're really thrilled to be here with you all today, and along with this wonderful panel of speakers to discuss more about the transition to high school. As Paolo mentioned, the webinar is building off of an article that April and I were lucky enough to co-author together for the State Education Standard, which very fittingly focuses on the transition to high school. I'm going to lead us off today with a presentation, just sharing a bit more about what we know from the research perspective about how adolescents are navigating this transition, what challenges they might be experiencing, and how to help them thrive during this time. I will share a few slides, and then April will join us later for the Q&A portion. So without further ado, let's get started. We can move to the next slide. So as was highlighted in this transitions issue of NASB's journal, all transitions through formal schooling are really important, but the transition to high school is notable because it's marked by several changes to adolescents' academic, social, and emotional lives that are highly consequential for their futures. And I want to contextualize this transition period briefly by saying that oftentimes the transition to high school or ninth grade is thought of as a time when there is a physical shift into a new school environment. That is the common experience for students in Texas and in other states, but there are other models across the US in which the transition to high school is not marked by a physical change. So in this case, many of the academic changes and challenges that we'll talk about in this presentation are relevant, but changes to adolescents' social lives may not be the same for those students who are not making a physical transition. But for those who are making physical transitions to high school, they're entering new and unfamiliar environments where they're challenged to make new friendships and forge relationships with new teachers. At the same time that these changes are intimidating, they're exciting for youth, and they simultaneously are experiencing developmental changes in their brain that both prepare them to meet these increased academic demands, as well as facing heightened emotional reactivity, making it a particularly sensitive time for social and emotional development. The transition to high school often represents a key marker in academics, where courses become more challenging and performance expectations are higher. So students are moving from middle school, where course grades are important, but course failures may not be as consequential, for example, and there might be standardized exams, but once they transition to high school, they now have end of course exams and AP exams in addition to those. So this misalignment between middle and high school expectations can sometimes leave students feeling unprepared. And for many, these changes are manageable, and students are set on positive trajectories through the rest of high school. But for others, however, these can sometimes be too challenging, and experiencing something like course failure, for example, can lead to grade retention, and that has longer lasting consequences. You can move to the next slide. So grade retention in ninth grade during the transition to high school in particular is important because there is a well-documented spike in grade retention in this grade. You can see this spike in the figure, which shows the percentage of students in ninth grade who did not meet performance expectations to be promoted to the next grade level in Texas public schools. This rate of 8.3% is less than half that of 2 decades ago when the Texas legislature passed the ninth grade success initiative, which was specifically aimed at reducing grade retention. So this issue of grade retention was something that brought the transition to high school to the forefront in Texas and in other states, and sparked more research into understanding why some youth were experiencing challenges which were putting them at greater academic risk. Next slide. So, when we dig into these challenges through a developmental and a neuroscience lens, they make sense. The brain changes occurring during adolescence reflect an imbalance between the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning and information processing and is maturing slowly during this time, and the limbic system, which is responsible for emotion processing, motivation, rewards, and is developing rapidly. And this imbalance may reflect some of the commonly reported academic challenges at the transition, such as grade decline, increased absences, and at worst, course failure. At the same time, however, this shift into the new environment with new opportunities is exciting, and adolescents' confidence, motivation, and interest in school tends to stay the same or improve. In the social and emotional domain, heightened emotional sensitivity can manifest an increased risk of depression and loneliness and lead adolescents to perceive less emotional support. But it's important also to note that these challenges are specific to the period of the transition into high school. And generally, we do see improvements and recovery for most students as they proceed through school. But this is not uniform, which is why interventions during this initial transition period and even before starting in middle school are really critical. One approach to helping mitigate the challenges associated with the transition to high school is by centering strong, positive relationships. Relationships are key during the entire life course, but during the transition, they may also be in flux due to these physically changing environments. So, as students move from middle to high school and make the physical transition to a new school, the close bonds that they formed with their middle school peers may be compromised due to increased physical distance. They're also entering often larger school environments and can be left feeling like a small fish in a big pond. They're also entering environments with all new teachers and have to start from scratch developing those bonds and building trust with them. During this period, adolescents are also grappling with seeking independence from their parents and building their own personal identities, while also still actively benefiting and needing their parents' educational involvement and support. So, despite these relationships being in flux during the transition period, forging strong connections is really crucial because supportive relationships with peers and teachers help protect youth from facing these academic and emotional challenges during the transition to high school and are related to positive social and academic outcomes throughout high school. So, leveraging all of the research on adolescent development, we can see that the transition to high school is a critical focal point for educators and for state leaders. Harnessing interventions which target the whole student and center their developmental strengths, particularly through strong supportive relationships, is a really promising way to support students through this transition and to help them thrive. We also should highlight that preparing for the transition to high school should happen long before this physical transition occurs, while students are still in middle school, so that we can note any early warning signs and prevent any challenges before they occur. So before wrapping up, I want to highlight a few key approaches for developing successful high school interventions. This list is by no means exhaustive, but it highlights much of what we've already discussed. First, we really can't emphasize enough the importance of strong relationships with the key socializers in an adolescent's life, their peers, their teachers, and their parents. Starting early is also key, and one way to do this is by investing in data-driven accountability systems with early warning indicators. The more we can understand patterns of course performance, attendance, and behavior starting in middle school will only help us identify the risks that adolescents might face in their first year of high school, and again, work towards preventing them rather than intervening when they've already occurred. Finally, recognizing the emotional sensitivity of this developmental stage and centering emotional and social development as well as academic development is essential for any intervention. So I want to highlight two programs which have implemented many of these features. The first is the Grad Partnership, which is a program born out of the Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins University. This program utilizes student success on-track systems to help improve student outcomes. And these student success systems are data-driven with continued year-by-year monitoring, and they combine early warning data, early warning data, targeted interventions, but also uniquely feature, oh, sorry about that. I lost my spot. Combine early warning data, strong supportive relationships to boost school connectedness, and targeted interventions to support struggling students. And outcomes data from this intervention showed that the partnership was highly effective in reducing absenteeism and course failure particularly in ninth grade. Another example is the Texas ninth grade Transition and Intervention Program, which was a statewide initiative designed to help support ninth graders who were identified as at risk for dropping out. The program had similar features to the grad partnership, such as an early warning data system and targeted interventions, but also uniquely featured a summer transition program to introduce incoming ninth graders to the high school culture and to help them develop their academic and social skills. And this program also had a positive impact on teachers based off of their reports and also helped improve ninth grade reading and math scores. So these are just two successful examples of ways to support a successful transition to high school. But another very strong research-based approach is the BARR model, which I am excited to pass along to Rob to share a little bit more about. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Rob Metz. I'm the Deputy Director of the BARR Center. As was mentioned earlier, I was a 36-year career educator. I was an elementary teacher, then an elementary principal, then a high school principal, and then a superintendent. And most notably, I was the principal of the first BARR High School. This first slide highlights the first important thing to know about BARR, and that is that BARR is a K-12 training partner that can help schools achieve many outcomes at the same time. Typically, schools and policymakers take a siloed approach to school improvement. They fund and work on one thing at a time. For example, they implement programs to increase math scores, or to reduce behavior incidences, or to increase attendance. BARR is different. BARR changes the way we do school. When you change the way you do school, you can improve in many areas, all at the same time and fast. BARR calls this approach to school improvement systems change. Next slide, please. You think you went back one, you just need to go forward one. Thank you. BARR has a huge positive impact on students as they transition to high school because it quickly and dramatically reduces the number of classes that ninth graders fail. The ninth grade failure rate is the most important data point at any high school. If a student passes all of their ninth grade classes, they will graduate in 4 years almost 100% of the time. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. If a student fails 2 or 3 ninth grade classes, now they have to take all their 10th grade classes, plus some ninth grade classes. They're not feeling very good about themselves or their school, and they begin a long and depressing uphill climb toward graduation. And as many students come into ninth grade, they are completely unaware of these high stakes. Ninth grade is the first time that their grades have actually counted, that their GPA starts calculating. In the traditional high school system, it's very common for 40% of ninth graders to be failing 1 or more classes by the end of October. And if they do indeed fail these classes, they will be sabotaging their educational future before they even get out of the gate. BARR does not let that happen. It gave me great pleasure to stand in front of our ninth graders at ninth grade orientation and tell them that if they passed all their classes, even the first semester of ninth grade, I was confident they'd be graduating on time and have a great experience at our school. And lucky for them, we had a team of BARR teachers ready to support them every step of the way. So how does this look like in a school? Next slide, please. BARR's founder, Angela Jarbeck, was a ninth grade counselor. She could see the flaws in the traditional high school system, which we at BARR call the factory model or the assembly line. In a factory model assembly line school, a student moves from hour to hour to hour, from teacher to teacher to teacher, but those teachers never come together to talk about the students. Each teacher sees a piece of the student, but none of them see the whole student. And the teachers are very isolated from one another. They're in their room by themselves. It's a sink or swim job for a teacher. The BARR system brings teachers together across disciplines to track and support a group of students that they have in common. You can see an example of that in the picture on the lower right. These teacher teams track each student's traditional school data, grades, attendance, discipline, as well as qualitative data. What are the students' strengths? What are their sparks? What excites them? Who's got the best connection with them at the school? The BARR teacher teams share concerns, set goals, and design strategies for each and every student. Teachers share with one another and learn from each other. There are 3 different types of BARR meetings each week, each focusing on students with different levels of need. In that way, every student is discussed with the right team of adults around the table. Because they are tracking students so closely, the BARR teacher teams intervene quickly, designing strategies and putting them into action. If they don't work, they toss them out and try something else. I describe the BARR teams as plan, do, study, act on steroids. The second problem Angie noticed was that relationships were lacking all over the school. Some teachers were good at building relationships, some were okay, and some didn't even think it was part of their job. And students often stayed in cliques, not mixing and getting to know each other in a meaningful way. In a factory model assembly line school, relationships are hit and miss at best. Certainly not anything you can count on. BARR teachers facilitate weekly relationship building activities called I-Times, with the goal of building student-to-student relationships and teacher-to-student relationships. You can see a picture of an I-Time on the bottom left side of the screen. The BARR teachers take turns delivering the I-Times, so students get one every week, but the teachers don't miss too much content time. Relationships don't happen by accident. With the help of I-Times, every teacher can build meaningful relationships with their students, and the students will get to know each other in a much deeper way. BARR is a relationship building machine. So when you implement a BARR structure that allows for plan, do, study, act on steroids, and combine it with a relationship building machine, amazing things happen. At the first school, our failure rate dropped from 40% of 9th graders failing one class or more to 10%. That set off a cycle of success. Our graduation rate for Black students rose above 90% when the state average was 60%. The number of students in our AP, honors, and IB classes increased. Behavior incidences dropped in half. So few students were not on track to graduate that we closed their alternative high school, saving hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Next slide, please. After seeing these amazing outcomes at the original school, BARR applied for and received 3 federal I-3 grants from the U.S. Department of Education. I think of I-3 as a contest for good ideas. If you had a good idea out in the field and you wanted to have it evaluated, you could apply and be selected to test it. It kind of reminded me of American Idol, where the contestants tried to achieve outcomes and move on to the next level. First, BARR applied for and was awarded a development grant. We put BARR into 2 schools, Bucksport, Maine, and Hemet, California. At Hemet, we did a randomized control trial where half the 9th graders got BARR and half did not. Students were randomly assigned to one side of 9th grade or the other. By the end of that first year, the BARR students outperformed the non-BARR students in every way. Their test scores were higher, they passed more classes, GPA was higher, attendance was better, behavior incidences were fewer. Based on the outcomes of that project, BARR applied for and received a validation grant. In that case, we did 11 more randomized control trials in all corners of the country, got the exact same positive outcomes. The kids on the BARR side did significantly better than the kids on the non-BARR side. Based on those results, we applied for the grand prize of I-3, the scale-up grant, and were awarded it. We did 66 more randomized control trials. This time they were between school randomized control trials, where one school's 9th graders got BARR and the other school's 9th graders did not get BARR, and after 1 year, they were compared to see which side did better, the exact same outcomes. By the end of that 10-year research and evaluation journey, AIR, the American Institutes for Research, who were the evaluators, identified 20 statistically significant outcomes that BARR produced. Kind of a funny story, at the beginning of this project, AIR cautioned us saying, you're probably not going to see any outcomes. It's really hard at the high school level to show a statistically significant impact in 9 months. So 10 years later, to see all these outcomes over and over and over and over in all corners of the country, in all kinds of schools, it was very rewarding. BARR was eventually named the poster child of the I3 project, the only entrant that went through all 3 levels. And you can see along the way at the bottom, lots of organizations and groups that accredited us. We appear in all of these different organizations as a research-based proven model. Next slide, please. So my last slide is called a mediation analysis. And the people at AIR were crunching through the numbers and said, okay, what is happening here? How can all of these outcomes be happening so fast in 1 year at all of these schools, time after time after time? And they created this to explain it. So when most schools try to achieve an academic outcome, let's say a higher math score, they start on the right-hand side of this chart, and they change something in math. They change the math curriculum, the sequence of math courses, the math prerequisites. BARR works just the opposite. We start on the left-hand side of this chart. We coach the teachers at the school how to use this new system. They believe that their school administrator is effective. They believe they can make a difference. By the way, the outcomes are along the bottom. Once their attitudes change and their belief systems change about what's possible, their behaviors change. They learn how to collaborate better with each other. They use data differently, and they are able to build positive, intentional relationships with their students. Not surprisingly, the students feel this. They feel more supported. They feel more is expected of them, and they become engaged. Now, an engaged student behaves differently. They come to school more, they get in trouble less, and they demonstrate better skills themselves. And then the academic outcomes are just a byproduct of what I call a left to right system. Sometimes schools come to us and say, how did our math scores go up? We didn't change anything in math. And I tell them it's because it's a left to right system. Students are engaged, they're going to do better in school in every way. They become engaged through relationship. Relationships come through a different system. So moving from a right-handed school, and by the way, I go into many, many, many schools as part of my role at BARR. 95% of them are still right-handed schools. When you become a left-handed school, everything changes. Thank you, and I will pass it back to Paulo.
Rob, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. I love that last slide that you showed, because I think when I think of those first 2 chevrons on the left, it's really about culture, organizational culture. And those of you who know me who know I'm a big organizational culture person, because you know what they say is culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have a great strategy, but if you've got lousy culture, if your teachers don't really have buy-in to what's going on in the school, if they don't believe in the administration, if they aren't, understanding their own self-efficacy and really committed and believing that students can succeed, you're not going to be able to make that change. And I think you make that point ever so nicely. I'm going to ask my 2 panelists to join, Daniel and Linda, because, Daniel, one of the reasons we wanted to feature BARR, again, we're a state leadership organization, and the state of Maine has, I think you're probably the premier state that has embraced the BARR Center model. And I want you to talk a little bit about, maybe what led up to that, and how it's, working out in Maine, and whether you see yourselves on the trajectory to drive the kind of improvement that you're hoping.
Sure. Thank you, Paulo, and thank you to NASB for having us here today. This is a wonderful opportunity to share the exciting things that are going on in Maine schools, thanks to a partnership with BARR. So, as you heard Rob say, one of the very first schools that utilized BARR was here in Maine, Bucksport, unassuming a beautiful coastal town, and they started right away and is still one of the schools implementing. Fast forward to today, we have 118 schools in the state that are BARR schools, and we're very proud of that work. Many of those schools, 94 of those, were supported by our use of ARP funds in order to help bring that training and coaching to those schools. So we're very proud of that work. It was really because of our focus on a whole student approach to learning. So that is not only the academic goals that we have, but also the well-being and mental health concerns that we have for our students. And the BARR model matches very nicely because of, as you heard Rob describe, the I and U times that are the lessons that students engage in, that builds the relationships between them and with their teachers. And we have seen, specifically in our state, some amazing results that we're very proud of. And while we have results across all of our schools, about a third are high school. And those include, failure rates. We've had schools that have decreased on average about 33% their failure rates. Specifically for ninth grade failure rates, we have a range of between 15 and 58% decreases in ninth grade freshman failure rates, which is pretty remarkable, and we're very proud of that work.
Excellent, excellent. I love the way you talk about it in terms of the whole child model, because I think it really amplifies what Briana said, right? Briana, the takeaway I have from Briana's comment is, if you want students to learn, if you want, the academic component of education to be fulfilled, you also have to be attentive to those non-academic factors. And otherwise, you're not going to succeed. And so another state that is doing great work in that area, Linda Darling-Hammond, the great state of California, you all too are focusing on a number of levels, ways to address those whole child needs in the interest of driving both a productive space and context for students to learn and actual, accomplishment in terms of learning. Talk a little bit about the kinds of things that California is doing.
Well, we've been trying to adopt a whole child accountability system for a long time. When we overhauled in the prior board that Mike Kirst was leading, all of our accountability systems. So we have a lot of indicators like school climate indicators based on student surveys, like engagement indicators. We measure things like student suspension rates, but we also have a college and career index, which looks at a lot of indicators of whether kids are getting access to, fulfilling and exciting and engaging learning. So those are useful because they trigger for us places to pay attention by student subgroup as well as by areas of the school. We have community schools operating now on a very large level. We have 2,500 community schools in the state that are really built on a whole child framework. How do you address not just the around the edges needs of the students in terms of healthcare and mental health care, but also transform the center of the school so that the caring relationships, the restorative practices are central to the work. That work is leading us to high school redesign. And, we are a member of the NASB transformation group of states. And the BARR initiative is very important as a way to start dealing with moving the factory model high school that is so relationship devoid. It was not built to allow for relationships, to a model that in fact builds those relationships in. And I think Rob said very nicely that this is really a systems change. It's not about just changing the attitudes and behaviors of individual teachers who want to be in relationship with their students, but it's also changing the structure of the school in ways that allow them to work together, to collaborate, to talk about kids, to have moments in a sort of advisory setting where they can be with students. And we've seen in California schools that are designed in that way, not only in the ninth grade, but all the way through the school, also have these higher success rates, reduced failure rates, because they build in those structures that make sure that kids have a home base, a family group, teachers who are connected to them and their parents, and who are connected to each other in this collaborative way, which also makes teachers want to stay, right? Because their work is more efficacious, because teacher efficacy is the greatest element of teacher retention. So we're tackling that now in a larger scale way. We appreciate the BARR program, which is in a number of California schools, as a wonderful starting point for the 9th grade. And we also want to build that capacity, throughout all of the grade levels, so that students have those relationships and teachers have those relationships, all the way through.
Excellent, excellent. And I want to pick up on a couple of themes. I mean, in every comment so far, we've heard talk about data, right? Linda, you mentioned your accountability system. Rob had it on one of his slides at the school level. Talk about, the kinds, you mentioned a little bit, Linda, about the kinds of data. Daniel, does Maine, how does Maine look at data beyond just the regular state assessments in order to inform its work at the state level?
Sure. So we have our accountability model, as each state does. And some of those components obviously are graduation rates and chronic absenteeism at the lower grade levels. And our data from BARR implementation is showing, huge improvements and excelling in those two particular areas. And as Rob was saying, it's not what I would call and have called a whack-a-mole approach. You're not whacking something and then something else is popping up. BARR is across the board and is intentional. I'll take it down to the micro level at the school level where BARR is implementing with data. BARR supports teachers with utilizing spreadsheets to help scaffold how the data is organized and utilized. And I've watched this over and over with the meetings that teachers have when they're discussing this data. It starts right off with something positive and connections that those teachers have with a student, and identify some concerns that may be there, and then gets immediately into problem solving with what the strategy or intervention could be. So we can talk about macro data sets and so forth at the state level, which is useful. But the BARR model really implements a way for teachers having a real close eye on the data for their own students. And I will mention that accountability occurs, again, not at the macro level for the state necessarily, as much as a interpersonal accountability between the teachers. I see there's a question that someone's asking about how unionization may impact this. I would say I haven't heard anything from our BARR schools that the union had to be involved in contract negotiations or changes. That's not to say that it hasn't, but it's not been brought to our attention. If anything, the relationships between these teachers working together has strengthened. And also, I would say that, if you're a teacher coming to this discussion about data and you haven't updated your data, or you haven't made some changes or had that connection or talked to the student like you said you would, there's a level of personal accountability amongst your peers and colleagues that really raises the stakes. And I think that's how we're seeing some of the results occur, because of that interconnectedness and accountability at that teacher to teacher level.
Yeah, and can I just add that one of the wonderful things about it is that you have data about maybe how the student is doing in courses, or whether they're missing school or whatever, and then the teachers in their exchange with each other are adding more data that they personally have about the child, the family, the context. So the data becomes more and more enriched by that knowledge base that is really in the relationship itself.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to Rob mentioned it's a plan, do, study, act cycle on steroids. And I love that, because one of the things I've observed about our education system is we really don't train our administrators and our teachers in improvement science, right? In that idea that if you say, okay, I'm gonna do this a little bit differently, the question should always be, well, how do we know it's gonna work? And then what are we going to do if it does work to amplify it, or if it doesn't work, what are we going to do to change it? And I think a well-run PLC, a well-run sort of teacher meeting like Rob described, the use of data, and a real, sense of I can change my practice and accommodate my practice based on the data and the support I'm receiving from other teachers and administrators. That continuous improvement cycle really can take effect, because I think we don't see as much of that as we could, and with a little training, I think we could see a lot more. I want to talk a little bit about this notion of the state policy and practice role. Daniel, I think you talked about prioritizing the use of some of your federal funds and making that kind of decision. Say a little bit more about, are there other policies that are in place or actions that have been taken, even if it's not formal, not legislation or whatever, that really advance the idea that, hey, this is the kind of thing we need to be focusing on. We need to be supporting students and their both in terms of relationships and their well-being in the school setting.
Sure. I saw another one of the questions was about local control, and Mainers are very proud local control when it comes to what we do here. And as a State Department, we've taken the approach of just get out of the way and support schools with what they're trying to accomplish. This by no means, even though we have 118 BARR schools, was no means a mandate or a requirement. As a matter of fact, Commissioner Macon went to the BARR conference a couple years ago and came back so jazzed up about it, and had this opportunity with the federal funds, and had an open invitation for schools that were interested, and that we would fund the 3 years of training and coaching. And we were blown away when 70 schools immediately, within 2 weeks, we also said, oh, by the way, let us know in 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, we had 70 schools sign up and take advantage of that, which we were happily able to accommodate. So again, we saw something that we thought was powerful and effective and could be utilized in our variety of schools that we have in the state. BARR will refer to it as being a firm but flexible model, and that is very true. One of the first things we always will hear in any kind of implementation or change at the high school is the schedule. The schedule is going to either make it or break it. And as a matter of fact, you know what? You can implement BARR and the schedule can be addressed. And we now have, again, over 100 schools in our state, not all high schools, but all sorts of different schedules, block, regular, traditional schedules. And I know that the BARR Center will support schools in how they can address a schedule. That's always one of the big things, that and lunch, but the kids got to eat.
The master schedule is the master of all possibilities in high schools. So
right.
That's
and the person that owns the master schedule is usually some mythical person who everything has to be maintained as it always has been before. And I think blowing it up is often a good or only empowered to actually rethink it, maybe is a better way to say it.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention the support from our Maine State Board of Education.
Please.
The State Board of Education in our state, I know we have a couple members on here, so I'll give them a shout out. We're interested in BARR because they kept hearing about it. It was kind of a buzz, and asked if they could learn more. And again, in partnership with BARR, we were able to bring the state board to a school. The school hosted the State Board of Education hosting a meeting, one of their regular meetings, and they kind of got to know what BARR looks and feels like and the culture that exists in a BARR school. That was Westbrook Public Schools, which again is a school that has been implementing BARR for quite a while. So a recommendation I would have, if any of you are state board members or other policymakers that are interested in knowing anything really about successful things, but in particular BARR, is to go see it, go get a feel for it. We're happy to host if you're nearby or not so nearby. We would love to have you come to see our schools and see what BARR is. And I think it's important as State Board of Education members to not just hear about it, but also to see it in action.
Linda, talk a little bit more from your vantage point as a state board member about the policies that both the support of the board, because sometimes just supporting it and being in favor of it and spreading the word is a good thing, but also some of the policy changes you all have made. You talked about some of them, but maybe you can expand on those a little bit.
Sure. Rob already mentioned using money wisely. And so that sometimes we have that opportunity. And I think the way that they did it in Maine was very thoughtful to open it up to those places that wanted to participate in a quick and efficient way without a whole lot of delay associated with it. So I really like that strategy. We are kind of the keepers of instructional minutes and things like that. We have a lot of regulations that are born out of the factory model. And they differ a little bit from state to state, but they hold that model in place in many ways. And we need to be sensitive to the ways in which we need to be able to flex those, those parameters around how time is used and how people and how adults and children are put together, and how they relate to each other. So some of that, happens in other settings, collective bargaining agreements and other things, but there are a lot of pieces that are at the state board to look at. And I think as we think about schools adopting to all of the needs of the current moment, being mindful of the ways in which the regulations we have are, creating parameters that make it harder to change is something that's very important to us. So we're thinking about those things. There are also the things like understanding how students are feeling about school. So in California, we have a student survey requirement that local districts need to enact. We've sort of made that more important in the last couple of years by making it an annual requirement. And we have something called local control accountability plans, where the ways in which communities need to reflect on the data that they have is part of that plan. So being more in tune with and in touch with how students are experiencing school can reinforce both the need for and the outcomes of these kinds of changes, and help people see that when you strengthen relationships in the ways we're talking about, that has a lot of other salutary effects on other aspects of the school. And we've mentioned the fact that the factory model was not designed for relationships. Every 45 minutes going to another teacher. I was a high school teacher. I had 180 kids, 30 at a time, 6 periods a day. That was back before many places got to 5-period days. And you could care deeply about your students, but you couldn't care for them effectively unless you had a system that allows you to work with other teachers, have touch points with students that are in smaller contexts, et cetera. So those things that raise up the experience of school and flex the time in ways that we can reinvent that model are going to be very important for state boards to think about.
Which is a big part of our high school transformation work, is moving beyond the traditional ways that we think about high school. Let me remind our attendees that if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Right now, sort of our open Q&A segment. So put them in the Q&A space, and we'll continue to respond to them as we have up to this point. Linda, I want to build on your idea, because I think a lot of the innovations we're seeing are things like project-based learning, breaking apart this notion that classes have to be taught in disciplinary, English is here, math is here, science is here, social studies is here. What about, blending those into a project-based learning approach? What about work-based learning approaches? What about learning that happens, on the weekends or in different places? I mean, so many innovative ideas surface that are just as rigorous, just as powerful, and accommodate this idea of relationship building and belongingness. We're also seeing some emerging understanding of strategic staffing models that allow teachers to be more, clustered in the way they approach this work. What are some of the, and I'll open this up to anybody, what are some of the other innovations in terms of the high school experience that you may be seeing out there that you think are really proving to be effective in where they're being deployed?
Well, I'd just like to piggyback on that and then punt it around. Having teachers together, the 9th grade teachers together who teach the different subject areas, and then they kind of own a group of students, also allows for interdisciplinary planning. You can make learning much more meaningful because you can create an interdisciplinary project. You can do elements of it in different classrooms. You can play with strategic staffing and allow people to be in teams. I just read a study today about how teachers teaching in teams with differentiated staffing and strategic staffing are staying in schools at much higher rates because they have that collaboration. So there's a lot that organizing teachers in that way can buy you in terms of the engagement of the curriculum as well as the relational side. And I'll let others add on.
Who else wants to add to innovative practices they might be seeing out there?
We also, I'll just add, we have these linked learning schools. We have 600 pathways in California. We're adding to those with more money. They design their schools very much on the BARR model. The teachers work in teams around kids. They have advisory systems, but they also do internships that are industry connected. There's an industry theme for the course. The curriculum itself is made more applied to health professions or the legal system or whatever the theme may be. And then teachers are engaged in different ways around the support of the internships and the experiential learning. And that's another piece of the puzzle that keeps kids focused, purposeful, engaged, and not only coming to school, but really excelling.
Well, and those climate surveys are really key in terms of understanding, you know, because a lot of times you can walk into school, somebody says, oh, our kids are fine. Then when you do a climate survey, you actually find out what's going on. And then that drives. The other thing I'm a big advocate for, and I see it happening more and more all the time, is engaging students. Student voice, you know, for such a long time, we haven't always been attentive to student voice, or we think we know what students think. But increasingly, people are talking to students. Students are engaged in designing the day, the courses, having input in terms of what's happening, and not in a way that dumbs it down or makes it easier, because students actually crave rigor. They want to learn. They want to improve themselves and set themselves on the right path. I want to, we're almost out of time here, but I do want to ask maybe one last question. I see a couple of questions in the chat. Rob, I think the answer to the one about Maine expanding the model to other grade, you told me the BARR is in all grade levels. BARR is not limited to high school, so I'm assuming in Maine it's happening all across. You'll find it in elementary schools, middle schools, and other places. So that answers that question. And Carrie also asks about other grades that confirm this model improves academic outcome and student well-being. Again, I think your research has been inclusive of other. It's not simply a high school model. And I think, Carrie, if you look at some of the research reports on the BARR Center website, you should be able to find answers to those. What you have this audience of almost 50 plus visitors. If there's one thing you want people to take away from today's conversation, what would that be? All right, so I'm gonna who should start that? Maybe I'll start with Linda, and then we'll just I'll work around my screen here. Linda.
I would just take away the notion that systems change, as Rob put it early on, that is creating the structures within which different kinds of relationships can be forged is key.
Excellent, excellent. Daniel?
I would say that as people think about starting something new or trying to change something, that implementing the BARR model is not adding something new. It is the thing. It's not adding something to take over. It is redesigning to make improvements. And with those relationships and data, we've seen amazing results. So I know it's easy for me to say, but it actually is true that it's not just adding something new. It becomes the thing that makes it all work.
And I want to amplify a little bit the main story, because I think it's actually brilliant, is you just did a call out. I mean, anyone on this call could do it. Who might be interested in having a deeper conversation about this? And you thought you'd get a few schools, and you got a lot of schools. And I think there are more people out there today that would be interested and would crave a discussion at least, and maybe some more concrete action around transforming high schools than most people think. So one thing, simple thing people could do is like find a few kindred spirits and start a bigger conversation, and then explore what you're able to do. Robbie, last comment from you. And then I'll go to Briana and April.
Yeah, I would just say any school can do this. We're currently teaching 220 schools in all corners of the country this new system. We have learned over time that we spend 3 years with the school, and at the end of the third year, we leave. So our job is to teach them how to use this system to move from the factory model to this system, and they can do it. And we're coaching giant high schools with 1,000 ninth graders and little tiny K-12 schools that have 4 kids in a grade. And it works just the same at every one.
Great. Briana?
Yeah, I think I would just echo some of the sentiments of like there's a lot of power in equipping people with the resources. I think all educators, parents, and youth want to be really successful, but don't necessarily have the tools or resources. That was like definitely an undercurrent of all of this. And the more we can do to invest in that, the better we can support our youth. So
Great. April, you probably haven't said anything the whole time, but I'm going to give you the last word.
Excellent. Well, I really do think when schools and districts and school boards are thinking about how to support the transition into high school, going beyond academics is important. And that's what we found in Texas is when we did our initial evaluation many moons ago on the 9th grade success initiative, it was only on academics. And the kids and the teachers talked only about social relationships, right? And that is where we saw this disconnect. And they shifted it because of that, because student voices and teacher voices are important as you institute that change. It can't come just from top down. It has to really work from bottom up.
Which maybe takes us back to the original icebreaker when somebody wrote about their 9th grade, maybe it was you were in the choir or the school musical. There was some other aspect that people remember more than their academic courses. Now, many of you talked about your favorite teachers, but it were those experiences and where you made friends and you were members of clubs and extracurriculars and on the sports teams and marching band and so forth and so on. So with that, you can always contact NASB if you want additional information or follow up. We're a small organization, but we have a lot of partners, as you've seen on this call, and we're delighted to connect you or provide additional information. I want to thank our amazing panel for their great commentary. Any one of whom I'm sure will you can follow up with, and we can be a conduit for that follow up. And again, going back to Rob's graphic, I think if teachers are happier, are more empowered, have a stronger sense of systems that are in place and feel supported in what they're trying to accomplish, and students are happier and empowered and feel a greater sense of belonging and engagement, you create a climate that will energize the learning and make wonderful things happen. And again, while we talked about BARR a lot, there are other models out there. So it's that combination, though, of really addressing culture as well as teachers, school climate, student belongingness, and creating conditions that allow to get at fundamentally the Briana issue. It's about well-being in the context of a great academic experience and a lot of good relationships that make for a successful education. Thank you so very much for joining us today. Keep up the great work each and every one of you does in the interest of student success. And we look forward to seeing you at our next NASB webinar. Take care.